at the characteristics of markets in these first three videos, and in this one here we'll just start with a little bit about what a market is, and then we're going to look at the demand curve. So when it comes to looking at the characteristics of a market, it can be a physical place like a shop, a retail unit. It can be a high street stall. It can be a mechanism, increasingly now the internet would be called a market, where buyers who demand the goods and sellers who supply the goods meet or make contact. And that's the key thing here, that when you're defining it, you mention that they're making some sort of contact and they have a willingness to trade, exchange goods, services, usually money, but it could be, of course, bartering as well. So when you're looking for a definition, it's some sort of physical place, mechanism. That's the first point there. There's contact, there's meeting with the view to exchanging goods and services. Okay. Now, you've already looked at the fundamental economic problem of the fact that there's a scarcity of resources and there's unlimited wants. And this really, the market mechanism, the price mechanism, called these two things here, is all about the allocation of those scarce factors, like how many goods are being produced in this market. Will therefore say we're using up the factors of production in this market. So that's quite important, that you see that it's concerned with the allocation. If you don't want the market to allocate, then the government have got to allocate, and you might already have come across the concept of a command economy. Okay, so what happens in the market is the market sets a price, and then the interaction of buyers and sellers, that sets the price and the quantity. And if that right price here, okay, is set, then the market is said to clear, and that's one of the concepts of equilibrium. So the market sets some price, and that happens when demanders and suppliers get together, and then the market clears. Okay. Now, before we look into demand in detail, just need to cover this concept of effective and notional demand. And it's always better, if you're in economics, to use the word effective demand, and its willingness backed up by ability. And that's quite important, because later on, when you start to analyze and the idea of demand, then the willingness to buy it is actually quite important, to be honest. Okay. But you've got to have the ability, and so therefore, what happens if you haven't got the ability? Well, we call that notional demand. So you're willing, but you haven't got the ability, and really you're not affecting the market. So I might be willing to buy a Ferrari at £150,000, but I don't have the ability, so I'm not really affecting the price. I have some notional demand, but not effective demand. Okay, so make sure you understand and you use these concepts, willing and able. And the factors that affect demand are going to be split into two parts, and this is really quite important. And in this video we're only looking at the first part, and that is the price of the good or service itself. All right. Now, that's really quite important, because we're going to be drawing the demand curve, and on one axis we're going to have the price of the good, and then look at what quantity is demanded at each and every price. But there's also non-price conditions. You can imagine it's not just the price of stuff that affects our demand, is it? It's things like our income, things like prices of other related goods and services. It's the weather. It's things like the taste and fashion, things like advertising. All these things affect demand, as well as the price of the good. Expected future price. This is particularly important in commodity markets, where if you think the price is going to go up in the future, then you start to buy more now, you demand more now. Population can also affect the demand. So all of these are called the conditions of demand, or the non-price conditions of demand. And what the complexity is that when you think about the demand for the product, if you don't make this assumption here, ceteris paribus, which you should already have covered, but it's basically saying we'll change one of these things and we'll keep everything else constant. So we might change income and keep price and price of other goods and weather and taste and fashion and advertising, etc. constant. If you don't do that, then you can't really draw your demand curve. Okay, so we'll see this in a minute. So here's the demand for chocolate in the middle here, and it might be affected by all these things here. Okay, so our assumption in economics is that we change the price, but we keep income, health, price of fruit, which is a substitute for chocolate. We keep those things as a constant, so they don't change. Okay, so let's have a look at the actual demand curve now and build our first curve. And basically we're looking, as I say, at the price of the good or service itself. And the best way to express it is the change in price affects the quantity demanded. Now, you get away, and it's become a bit loose. You can use the term it affects demand, but quantity demanded is the best one to use. But the key is it moves the market along the demand curve. That's absolutely vital. And it's known either as an extension of demand, okay, or a contraction of demand. Extension means the demand is going up, just like an extension to your house makes your house bigger, and contraction is when it gets smaller. Okay. All right. So as I say, we put here on this axis the price per unit. So that's the unit in every single good, and then the quantity we're going to buy of those units per time period. So let's say a day or a week, or it could be an hour. Okay. But that is quite important that you get that to start with, because later on you'll just get used to putting price and quantity on there. All right. Now, the demand curve is usually drawn to show what? Well, just, logically, if there's a lower price, more is demanded. Now, we'll look at this in a minute and we'll explain why that is the case. But, I think you could accept for now that lower prices, more gets demanded. And so if it's more demanded, it's an extension of demand. So we might start off with a price over here at P0, and we might be demanding Q0. Now I always start with a 0 here, a 0 here. You can put a P1 if you like. Q1 doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. Then the price falls to P1. What's going to happen to our demand? Well, at this price here, we should find that the quantity goes over here to Q1. More is demanded when we've lowered the price. So we draw a demand curve, simple as, and we call that an extension of demand. You are moving from this point along the demand curve, remember, because it's a price change, to this point here, and there's more being demanded when the price has fallen. So it is this price fall here that is causing that axis to change. So this is the primary axis. We start here and we see what happens here. Also, you can have a contraction of demand. Okay, in other words, at a higher price, less is demanded. So you'd move from here to here along the demand curve though. And it's known as I say, a contraction of demand. Try and use those words, really important. So let's delve a little bit behind this and explain, well, why might that be the case? And the argument would be that when you consume a good or service, you basically get some sort of benefit. We used to call it in economics utility. You can still call it that. Benefit, utility means exactly the same. Okay, you must get a benefit from it, otherwise you wouldn't give up your hard-earned money to buy it. So the assumption is that you want to try and maximize the amount of benefit that you get from the good, given the amount you've got to pay for it. So what happens is that if you keep consuming more and more, then the marginal benefit, now this is the first time you've hit this, marginal means the change in the benefit. The change in the benefit comes from consuming one last unit. So it's how much extra benefit given the extra unit that you are buying, the extra one unit that you're buying. And as I say, benefit, utility, satisfaction means the same. Okay? Alright, so let's explain it to you. The extra benefit from consuming one more is marginal benefit. As you consume more, the extra benefit is going to decline. Not the total benefit, but the extra benefit. Okay? And therefore, if I'm not getting as much benefit as I used to get, then the price of that good has to fall, okay, to persuade me to buy it. All right, we'll see this on a graph side, because the extra benefit, the marginal benefit, is going to be lower than the benefit received from the unit before it. So think of your first cup of coffee. You might be willing to pay, let's say £5 for your first cup of coffee in the morning. Then you've got a little bit of satisfaction from that. You think, oh, I'll have another one. Your extra benefit is not going to be £5 worth of benefit. You're not willing, and it's willing and able, effective demand, you're not willing to pay £5 for it. You're willing to pay maybe less, £4 for it. We'll see this on a graph. So the demand curve, or the demand schedule, slightly better to call it schedule, curve, line, doesn't matter because we draw straight lines. It's said to reflect the value that you place on the marginal benefit. Now, our underlying assumption, of course, is that we can work out our benefits, and later on in the course you'll drop that assumption. You'll say, well, what happens if it doesn't, if you can't work out the benefit? So let's imagine we've got a good here, and in the first unit here I'm buying one every day and I'm getting a £10 benefit. But if I buy the second one during that day, I might only get a benefit that's lower, let's say £8. Now what happens when I buy my third one? Well, my third one only gives me an extra benefit of £6. So the marginal benefit is going down, but of course this is the benefit from the first one, the second one, the third one. So the total benefit is actually rising, because it's rising at a slower rate. So it was 10, 18 when I bought 2, 24 when I bought 3. In other words, you add those up to get to your total benefit. What happens with my fourth one? Here it is, fourth one, £4 worth of benefit. So the argument is that if this is what I know, then I'm willing to pay £10 for the first one, but I'm only willing to pay £8, willing to pay £6, willing to pay £4 for those extra units. And so we draw our demand curve in, and we call the demand curve equal to the marginal benefit curve. Okay, and that's quite an important thing to get hold of at this early stage, really, that demand measures your marginal benefit. Now, what happens though if the price, and I put a price in here, is say £4? Well, for that first unit I was willing to pay, because I got benefit of £10, but it's only cost me £4. So therefore there's a gap between marginal benefit and the price in the market, and that gap of £6 is going to be called something, okay, in a minute. What about the second one? Well, there's the gap. I'm willing, because I'm getting benefit of 8, I only have to pay 4, so therefore I'm getting something of £4 worth of net benefit, if you like. This one, there it is. Now, what do we call those differences there? It's the difference between the marginal benefit for each good and the price we have to pay for those goods in the market. And what we do is we take those across and we call them a consumer surplus, okay? And that consumer surplus, if you imagine I've done this very lumpy, one good, two goods. If this was a continuous 1, 2, 3, and you could hardly see those lines up to 1,000 goods or something, then the consumer surplus is the area between the demand curve here, there at every output level here, and the price that we had to pay. So the consumer surplus is this area here. All right, so hopefully that's you understand that, and as I say, that's going to be of real use later on throughout the whole of the economics course. So in summary, changes in price will change the quantity demanded. We get loose and we just say demand at times, that's okay. But the key, this is not negotiable, it must be shown as a movement along the demand curve and known as an extension or contraction of